Okay, let's talk about escape. So escape is the one new mechanic. It's what they ended up using instead of Stygian. It came about during set design as the underworld mechanic of choice. How do we feel about escape?
As the one who keeps talking about Elspeth, it took Elspeth 9 years to get out of the underworld, and it sort of bugs me that there's this mechanic that lets every random common, or not every random common, but a bunch of random commons just sort of like do it for free. So I feel like it really, and again, maybe this wasn't the story and this was only what was going to be the story in my head, but it really sort of downplays the majesty of the story. That is note one that I have about Escape. And note two is, at least if you're going to talk about the theme, there's a very clear card type that should be escaping in my mind, namely creatures, and yet somehow we have escaping sorceries and other such things, and that also struck me as very weird in the set. I don't know if that choice struck either of you as weird, but that really surprised me, I'll say, at least.
Yeah, I think the name was both on the nose and completely inappropriately inaccurate. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Oh, I get it. It's escaping. Wait, I don't get it anymore. My glimpse of genius or whatever is escape. My think twice is now escaping the underworld. I don't know.
See, here's where I can bring you some unique insight.
Ooh.
Look at the cards that we're talking about. Okay, some of them, yes, no, they don't make sense. But I'm going to name a couple of the ones that you did because the ones that people forget, yes, they don't work. But Cling to Dust, Glimpse of Freedom, Fruit of Tizerus, Sweet Oblivion, and Sleep of the Dead. What do these share in common? The answer is they are all things that you use to escape from your torture in the underworld. Cling to hope to try to remember what you've lost, and it says that in the flavor text. The Fruit of Tizerus is a brief moment of escape when you get to taste something good. The Glimpse of Freedom is you get to see the outside world and pretend that you can get there someday. And Sleep of the Dead is you get to go to sleep so you're not in the dead world anymore. And then Sweet Oblivion is you're forgetting all the awful things you're facing, you know? And then you get Sentinel's Eyes and Satyr's Cunning and Mogus's Favor and Escape Velocity, where it's like, we gave up on those ones, you know? So
that was very generous of you. I missed most of the argument, but I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, like the idea is if you look at the word on most of the sorceries and instance and you think of it as escapism, right?
Yeah, or something related to escaping.
Yeah, because it's not meant to be you are like the sorcery is not escaping the underworld when it happens. It is you are trapped in the underworld and you keep revisiting this thing because it helps you escape your existence in the sense of, you know, forgetting that you're in the underworld. In the case of Sweet Oblivion, quite literally.
I bet creative, when they were trying to flavor these cards, were just like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do here?
In those cards, I think they hit it out of the ballpark. I think the one issue is they hit it so far out of the ballpark, nobody can see it, right? Because most people will look at these cards and they'll say exactly what you said, which is, how are my sorceries escaping the graveyard? Because unfortunately, it's really blunt in the on the creatures that is what's going on. So It becomes harder to understand it. And they tried. Like, once you see that theme, I think it comes across beautifully. I think it's a really cool way to handle that, and it's a really fun pun. It's just not working in the sense of being clear to the audience, you know?
Yeah.
In terms of the mechanic itself, I was talking about escape a lot when it first came out, because I think the number one thing that people noticed about Theros was, where's the splash, right? Where's the mechanic that excites you? Where's the new novel thing? There is no bestow in this set, you know? And when Stygian was revealed, I went, that's where it was. Got it. That's what happened. But with escape, like, the closest argument I could get before I knew about Stygian was escape is revisiting a dangerous mechanic. Like, is it meant to be
yeah. But you have to know the history of broken mechanics to be excited about it. You know what I mean?
Correct. Like, it is the spikiest form of splash possible, which
but this time it's safe.
Yeah. And which also then ruins the splash, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is, like, you look at this and you go, if you have the ability to recognize this, you go, I could exploit this, right? I'm excited to figure out how to break this in half. And then you realize you can't. But that's where the splash would have theoretically been. The problem is you can't make that kind of splash because the very thing that you use splash to achieve is not that. Splash is used to draw people into your set in order to discover those things, right? But splash is meant to be relatively universally appealing and very punchy and obvious about its appeal. And so in the sense of splashy, it's not. It's what I would call appealing maybe, or enticing or provocative, but it's not splashy, right? And
it feels like a workhorse mechanic. Like
it feels like a workhorse mechanic, even though it's the exact opposite of a workhorse mechanic, right? It is a mechanic that the set is theoretically built around, and yet it feels like it's exactly, it feels like they built the set and they went, oh, look at all these things going to the graveyard, what could we do with that, right? Instead of the other way around, where they started Escape and then built a set that made things go to the graveyard, right? So
I would never do that.
I'm being hyperbole,
yeah,
but like it comes across as really working, right? And for a mechanic that's supposed to be central to the sensation of the underworld, it doesn't do that, right?
They're also very inconsistent in how they implement it on creatures. Like even aside from that, there's a lot of creatures that escape with +1/+1 counters, and a lot that don't escape with +1/+1 counters. And it really feels to me like if you're escaping, you should have haste. It's
oh yeah.
It's hard for me to believe that that's not included, but I sort of understand why. But then it's really weird that I'm like bringing back my 2-drop for a lot of mana at a time when it's not going to matter that I have a 2-drop and I can't even attack with the 2-drop.
Is there a 2-drop with Escape? I think they're actually mostly on 3+.
Yeah, Underworld Ragehound.
Yeah, which comes back as a 4/2. That's your excitement, is that since you're paying this ridiculous cost on this 3/1 that attacks each combat if able, then you get a 4/2 instead of a 3/1 later.
I don't mind that so much, because there's decks where that will obviously be worth doing. And like it makes 3/1s that you often are okay with in aggressive decks. The times when they're bad, it's not as bad. Like that design kind of makes sense to me, but in the context of the overall mechanic itself, sure. Like, did that need to be the design that there was Escape on? Maybe not.
I will actually also interject. All of the creatures except the Titans do escape with counters. So they are consistent in that regard.
Well, except all the sorceries and enchantments, right?
I said the creatures.
I know. But we've already acknowledged that's a significant chunk of the mechanic is the non-creatures.
Right, and so it is, again, they try to sell that with the flavor, but it is odd that the sorceries stay the same each time, but the creatures improve on future times, right? And I think that's because the sorceries go to the graveyard easier, in which case they don't need a reward when they come back later.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so there's arguments to be made there, but I do agree that it's an inconsistent mechanic because, again, I get this vibe from the set that they looked at this and they went, how can we use this mechanic, right? What is the design space? What are the neat tricks we can pull off with Escape?
It's like if they built a set around Monstrosity. You know what I mean?
Right, and that leads, and if you try to build a set around Monstrosity, you're going to get some pretty garbage designs, I think, because you're going to be trying to be too clever with Monstrosity. Monstrosity is not a mechanic you want to be clever with, I think. Monstrosity is a mechanic that the cleverness of Monstrosity is in the elegance of its execution, not in the cute, weird ways you're using it, right?
Yeah.
What I did? Sorry, I interjected on you, Tommy.
I am surprised. I really thought I remembered that there were ones without, and so I've been searching, and I think I now agree, at least up into what I've been able to see. I think you are right that aside from that one set, they do always escape with +1/+1 counters, which again,
but it's a variable number of counters.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the number of cards you exile.
Yeah.
It sometimes seems entirely incidental, or just like, this one, exile 3 cards. 4, 1, you know.
I don't even understand why you're exiling the cards, aside from the fact that, like, otherwise the mechanic would be broken. Because, again, this is supposed to be, like, the thematic home run, I think. And, like, are those...
It makes the graveyard matter more.
Escape? I don't get it. But,
yeah, well, I'm actually a big fan of Escape in practice and play. in all the drafts I did, it was something about Magic and New World Order is they're very careful about recursive mechanics, about players being able to do the same thing over and over again. And for players who want to do that, there's escape, and there's a cost to it, which asks you to also be doing other things. And I think kind of throwing that bone out, which is kind of a unique bone to throw, is nice. I think it's just kind of a clever way to make the mechanic work. I like that it makes the graveyard care more than just that card being in your graveyard. It makes the whole graveyard matter more in a way that's unique to other Graveyard Matters sets, where you just care about putting the things you can get out of the graveyard into the graveyard. My only real problem with Escape, I mean, I talked about the consistency a little bit, with the counters and the spells and stuff, and there are reasons, and that does make sense. It is kind of wordy. Like you look at Underworld Charger, it's 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's 7 lines of text on a common. That is a lot of complexity, and it's basically just the mechanic plus it can't block. But I don't know. I really enjoy it. But my real issue is the place it has in the set. Just like you were alluding to, it feels as if the whole set was built around it, when really, they were looking. The whole set was built around a different splashy mechanic, and they just had to do something else.
Well, that's not.
That's simplifying it a bit, but
okay. So my bad. You can scratch it. I see what you're saying. Yes. Yeah, in the sense of the feel and philosophy of the set, absolutely. The set was designed to hold something on a pedestal, and now that pedestal is empty, right? I would say I agree that for what it is, Escape is probably one of the better executions of such a mechanic. I think there is an untapped desire to repeatedly play cool cards.
I prefer it way more to Scavenge, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I want to be able to, when I play a cool creature, I like that cool creature. Underworld Ragehound, I have a fondness for Elemental Hounds, and I like the idea that I can keep playing my Elemental Hound over and over if I want, right? That's fun. I like knowing that my creature is safe in a certain sense, and that I get to keep doing the fun thing if I want to. They were very careful with these cards to make them so that they didn't present annoying, repetitive play patterns, I think. Like, Fruit of Tizarus can win the game on its own, but not in the most annoying of fashions. It's just burn. Like, it's basically just an enchantment that burns it if you pay mana into it, Glimpse of Freedom just draws cards. That's not too annoying to face off against. Aura's clearly a good choice because you can deal with those in lots of ways. Sleep of the Dead's one of the more, risky ones. And Sweet Oblivion's another win con, For the most part, they were very careful to make sure that it wasn't producing play states that were constantly repeating, right? It was either pushing towards victory in a way that wasn't an annoying fashion, or it was presenting creatures that had solvable hurdles, I think, or that weren't really dangerous as a hurdle to consistently show up, It's exciting to those kinds of players. It's an untapped well of sensation that we don't often see because they've been so hesitant to touch it. The thing that I don't like about Escape is it's another one of those examples of there's so much more to this mechanic, and they accidentally have left themselves in a corner. For one, they've named it Escape. That's going to be hard to revisit if necessary. If you come up in a set where you have the need for, this, and it doesn't work flavorfully, now you're going to do a backflip, right? And the other thing is, I really think that the exiling of the cards should have been baked into the keyword. And they're very hesitant to do that. It could have been, for example, Voracious Typhon has Escape, pay 7 mana, exile 4 cards from your graveyard. I would have done Escape 4-7 mana, right? That's what I would have done. And that way, more of the text is in the reminder text. So I don't have to keep looking at the cost just in case it's a different cost now. And then I can revisit the idea of Escape while also using a different expendable resource and not have people tell me, why isn't this Escape? You could have just changed what comes after the comma. Because they're not going to revisit Escape and change the cost or it's very unlikely for them to do it outside of Modern Horizons, because the definition of Escape includes the exiling of the cards. It's the same problem they ended up with when they did Haunt. To them, Haunt means it happens when something enters and it happens when something dies. Haunt doesn't have to do that, but they've baked that into the definition of haunt because that's what they designed haunt to do. I don't think they realize that they've accidentally done that again with escape. Do they want to ever do a mechanic like this again? I don't know. Looking at the cards they've done, they're coolish, but it definitely feels like they realized, oh, poop, we're doing a really dangerous mechanic here, and there's not actually a lot of different creature designs that can be safely brought out over and over, right? It's kind of like Undying, where it's really hard to revisit.
Or Affinity, right?
Or Affinity, yeah. In the sense of Affinity, there's ways to deal with that. There's a lot of flexibility there. But yeah, it's exactly one of those mechanics where maybe this is it. Maybe there is no design space left. Like they kind of implied that with Ascend, for example. Ascend's really cool, and they gave it very specific flavor, which really implies that when they were designing the set, they realized there was not enough space to revisit it in the future.
Or maybe that was just a conversation that just wasn't had. You know, they went to creative flavored it, and somebody forgot to say, by the way, we want to be able to do this again later.
I feel like I can't guarantee this, but that seems hard to forget because I'm almost entirely
That's fair.
That when they do handoff to creative, I know for a fact they mark individual cards as needing to have reprintable names. So I feel like they would do that with mechanics.
Yeah. Okay. If they do that with cards, they're definitely doing that with mechanics.
Right. And so to me, that implies that they probably realized that they could not return to this mechanic, and therefore they didn't build into it the possibility of doing so. But it would have been nice, you know, just in case, because you never know what can happen. And I think I don't want things to do backflips to try to ensure forward compatibility, but I do think there was that is a relatively simple change, and I'm sure they probably tested it and realized that people get confused when it says escape 4 and then has 7 mana afterwards or something, but I don't know.
What do you think about escape, Tommy? I mean, you've said your number 1 and number 2 things are about mostly inconsistencies, right?
Yeah, and so viewed as a raw workhorse mechanic, I think I like it, at least in terms of like if we're going to have some generic, like, I mean, I feel like this is basically cycling in terms of theme if you're going to put it on everything and randomly exile cards and all that kind of thing. So I think from that point of view, I think, yeah, this is a reasonable implementation of trying to make Dredge not broken, because this is like this is the closest they've come to Dredge since Dredge.
Yeah.
Certainly, and they're sort of like, it's just Dredge the other way. So that, from that point of view, it's fine. From another point of view, I would say it's weird that they're making the set Theros Beyond Death. It's about the underworld, which means it should be a graveyard set, maybe just because I like graveyards. But once you print Escape in your set, just like once you put Delve in your set, you can't use the graveyard for anything. It can't be a graveyard set anymore. And so we have this set that I feel like wanted mechanically to be a graveyard set, and it's not, because it has Escape in it.
Well, I mean, that makes it a very specific kind of graveyard set, and only for certain cards, which kind of goes back to my complaint where, I don't know if I said it or not, I don't feel like the whole experience is set in the underworld. I feel like certain cards are set in the underworld, and the set is built around playing those cards over and over.
Well, that's very true. Like, if you look at the cards, like, not a lot of cards actually take place in the underworld. You can tell because there's typically pillars and chains and the night sky, right? They were like, when I was reading the initial previews, I was so excited because they pointed out Theros is the world of summer. It's bright, it's always daylight, it's beautiful, you know? And we're about to visit the underworld, which is so easily told to be different because it is night, right? It is in the land, or close to the land of Nyx, or something like that. I don't remember the world building there because I didn't get reviewed on that. But you can tell when you're in the underworld in the art and stuff because it looks like nighttime. It's darker. There's the chains. There's the pillars. It has this super cool visual presentation. And I was so excited because when they showed off like that one basic island with the chains, I'm like, dang, I can't wait to make a deck with all chains in the art because that looks so cool. And then the set comes out and I can't make that deck. There's not enough cards that are taking place in the underworld for me to make a deck based on the underworld. Like, I feel like I might have not done a good job looking, but I actively feel like it's difficult to make that deck that actually sells cool chain vibe when that should have been every card in the set. You know?
Yeah.
It's weird, and I think that is exactly, again, we're talking narrative and flavor here, but it is built into Escape because, as Tommy said, I think there is an argument to be made for redefining the idea of a graveyard set, right? I don't think we need to do what Innistrad does when caring about the graveyard. I think it's okay to have a set that says the things in your graveyard are fuel, right? In the Underworld version of this set, we care about things going to the graveyard and things ending up in the graveyard. You want all that stuff, but the graveyard is a fuel, right? That could have been an interesting way. I don't think it needs to be literally caring about things in the graveyard. I can be caring about things going to the graveyard, things, making things go to the graveyard, all those different stuff. Maybe there's a way to do that. We didn't see that in this set. This set doesn't even do that. I don't get a strong graveyard set vibe from the set at all beyond Escape and its enablers. But when I see the enablers, I just think Escape enabler. I don't think graveyard set. You know what I mean? And I think the set was trying to do a lot, and it led it into a lot of different directions because Devotion cares about things on the battlefield, and then Constellation cares about things entering the battlefield and enchantments. And then the enchantments that they use in the set, yes, they do pick Constellation enchantments that can also work towards Devotion and Sacrifice, like the Omens. But you get this inherent tension when you're sacrificing things that loses the Devotion. So now you're trying to fill up the graveyard, but you're countering this other mechanic, like yada, yada, yada. It was really tough to pull those together into a mechanic that works. I think they did as noble of a job as they could with Sagas, with the Omens, with
the structure of the set.
Yeah, the structure of the set carries a lot of that weight. But when they moved away from auras a bit, they lost that ability to really easily have things end up in the graveyard. When they moved towards enchantment creatures, they kind of did it, but a lot of the set is not saying graveyard in a way that sells me on Underworld, and that kind of led to the creative of the set not showing the graveyard, which is weird. Like, to me, why am I looking at a seagull when I look at this flyer with Flash, right? It's on the daytime on the coast. Why am I Theros? I'm in the Underworld. I'm looking at Elspeth, Escape in the Underworld. Why am I looking at a random seagull up there? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And a lot of the cards, I'm just scrolling through at other graveyard things. Most of the other cards that say graveyard talk about exiling cards from the graveyard. Like, fighting the mechanic that is on the splashy pedestal, whether or not it's meant to be splashy itself. And
Tommy has thoughts about that.
Oh boy. But they do have stuff like Athenia the Cacophony, who exiles enchantment cards to make zombies, and then you have the weird statue of Timuret. Yeah. Timuret calls the dead.
Yeah, they definitely tried to establish the feel of fuel. I think.
But that's just more escaping, right? Like, it's kind of stepping on the toes of Escape in those cases.
Yeah, to me, and this was on my list of things to talk about overall, is, to me, it feels not like we're in the Underworld escaping with Elspeth. It feels like we're sitting on Theros and the Underworld is puking some stuff out at us that we're then killing.
Yes, that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah. Which, again, seems like, maybe this is just going back to what I thought the story was supposed to be about this set, but is not the exciting part to me of the story.
I just came to a realization. On air, everyone gets to hear my realization live. Once again, I think this is because of the Stygian mechanic. Think about it. The Stygian mechanic needed to separate the living and the dead, right? So they had to make the set include the Underworld and the active land of the living, right? So that led to them needing a creative that also would have done that, right? If the entire set was set in the Underworld, you couldn't do a Stygian mechanic because there wouldn't be a separation. Everyone's in the Underworld, right? And that's difficult to do as a part of the set. And I think that creative element also was the issue, which is, wait, how are we in the Underworld? Because the graveyard's the Underworld, right? So, like, the Underworld should be in the graveyard. So I can't show cards that take place in the Underworld easily unless they take place in the graveyard. But then they do that on a lot of cards. Like, there was that Nymph, Lampad of Death's Vigil. She's in the Underworld. She's got chains in the background, but she's not in the graveyard, right? And so I think they really got stuck on a pattern there, and then when they switched gears to escape, they still were thinking about the mentality of things transitioning from the world of the dead to the world of the living, and it meant that they had to portray the world of the living a lot more, and then that led to our current mistake, right?
Well, I think it's more just the mechanic. Like, I don't care so much that the art on the cards portrays more of Theros than the underworld if there were a mechanic where I could put all those cards in the underworld. You know what I mean? Like, if okay, sure, I've got my bright, Skull of Grove Dancer, but I put that sucker in the underworld. You know what I mean? It's on this side of the river. that would feel great. Instead, it's like, oh, she's dead. Well, that can help me bring back my 4/1.
Right, and you don't. There's not enough in the set to actively construct the feeling of tossing things into the underworld. Like Escape's intent with exiling cards in your graveyard, if I was to be very generous with its flavor, that would be saying, you're scrambling to escape the underworld while it's been ripped open as a part of the story, and you're kicking these guys behind you, using them as stepping stones to escape, right? But the problem is, those are the only things escaping the underworld, so you never really get the vibe that, like, it's exactly as you said, like, these other things either need to be tossed into the underworld and exploited, or they need to be escaping somehow with the staging mechanics, etc. It's tricky. I do think it matters that they don't show a lot of the underworld, because this is meant to be the underworld set, right? And it's frustrating that they don't show that. They gave themselves this very easy way to return to Theros and make it feel different but the same by intentionally avoiding the underworld, and they advertised that when they were talking about the set. They said, we left ourselves the underworld to work with, now we get to visit the underworld, it's going to be brand new to visit. And then so few of the cards actually feel like we've visited the underworld. It's exactly as Tommy said. It feels like I'm visiting Theros again, and things keep popping out from the ground underneath me. So
speaking of escape, can we talk about Elspeth's design and how that fits the story? Not necessarily individual card, but just in terms of, like, this is the whole the whole thing, right? And
well, is it her, or is it Elspeth Conquers Death? Which one is the which one is it?
Nemesis is the I guess but the Elspeth Conquers Death, they did this trick they like to do where it's a planeswalker with only minus abilities, so it dies, but then that has synergy with escape, they realize. So they made that, which is like the total Melviniest way to combine these things, but is a complete story miss, because Elspeth doesn't want to die again. Elspeth spent 8 years getting out of the underworld the first time.
All I want to do is make 2 soldiers like I used to. There goes half my life.
It just seems to be like, again, like, this was like one of the first cards previewed, and I was just like, this is just not the thing that I was expecting. It doesn't hit with me the way that they're trying to make this thing. But I don't know. Do you feel similarly, or do you love this design?
I think it's really interesting. I don't love it as the thematic face of the set, because it's also not good. Like, it's not a strong card. But Elspeth Conquers Death, I wonder if that's where that design comes from, because they're like, we want a story that's, shows the triumph of her doing it, But if it actually has the mechanic that is supposed to resonate that same moment, it doesn't work, because the mechanic is repetitive. Like, that's the fun thing about the mechanic, but it is also the least resonant part of it, and it's a resonance mechanic. You know what I mean? So it has to be a one-time escape, and so Elspeth Conquers Death works.
Right, and it doesn't work for this. I think you've hit, in my opinion, nail on the head. Again, I'm biased. I came up with my own ideas on doing a Return to Theros just for fun. I wasn't working on it or anything, but I was just theorizing, how would you return to Theros when Saga came out? Because I was like, that's it. That's the Return to Theros. Then I tried to design the rest of the set around it, right? And to me, Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis, this is the scariest part. Like, I probably would have designed Escape or something similar to it. Maybe not literally. I'm not saying I would have discovered it on my own, but I'm saying theoretically, there is a world where if I had made the set, Escape could have been a mechanic in the set, but I would have leaned exactly on what you guys are talking about. How do you make a world about the underworld and escaping the underworld while still preserving the difficulty and ordeal that it presents and representing Greek mythology's take on the underworld? Guess what? In Greek mythology, escaping the underworld is like, it happens routinely, right? Heroes constantly escape the underworld and then get thrown back in tragic, sad accidents. Orpheus is able to go because like the underworld is a physical place. You can get there through rivers. They were like, yeah, that cave over there, that goes to the underworld. They thought they knew where it was. So to them, it was not unimaginable to be able to escape the underworld, for one, but they didn't see dead people walking around all the time, so they realized that there must be something that prevents these people from coming back. Typically, that was in the form of tragedy. Like in Orpheus, they almost escape, but you're not allowed to look back. And he looks back and loses his shot, right? That is the exact sensation I would capture. Escape does that. You say it is repetitive. It's torturous, right? Don't make it torturous to the opponent, but make it present that this is the equivalent of Sisyphus, right? These people escape the underworld, go back to the battlefield, and they die again. Then they escape again, then they die again. Then they escape again, then they die again. They're trapped in a loop, right? They're constantly struggling to climb back up into life, and they never quite make it because their art shows them still in the underworld. So it's implying that it's a gradual escape, right? That they're getting closer. Use the liminal spaces in Greek mythology. Use the openings into the earth. Show the light coming in. They're so close to escaping, but they're still in the underworld. They're never going to make it out. Elspeth, I would have made this a Greek tragedy. I would have said Elspeth is trying to escape. In the story, she eventually will escape, maybe, and discover that Daxos is dead and all this other stuff. Oh, so sad. But her card would have not represented her triumph in the end. It would have represented the challenges and ordeals she's been facing in the 8 years. That would have led me to design a card much like this. When Tommy says this is not the triumphant conquers death, this is the Elspeth tortured in the underworld for 8 years. This is the Elspeth who every time she comes back, she's pushing herself and struggling to survive. And the more she pushes, the closer she gets to being trapped in death again. And then she escapes because she's a persistent, powerful hero who's constantly trying, who spends all this time trying to escape and finally does. And we get to see that story moment in the actual story because the card is meant to be capturing the experience and the sensation, which is the difficulty and challenge and torment of the underworld. Instead, we ended up with a set that 3 out of 4 mechanics do not say tragedy, difficulty, torment, sadness, etc. And then Sagas could have done that, right? And Escape could do that if it was designed to do that. And Sagas use the moment where you lose the saga, that flourish, keep it as a flourish, but make it be like, yeah, you've run out of the fun stuff. Like that was a short-lived, brief experience you had with greatness. It's gone, you know? Leverage that emotional moment. That's where I came upon the Greek tragedy. And we didn't see that. And I think that would have been the way to do it if I was to design this. And thanks to Tommy, that's how I got it. When he was saying what this card feels like, I was like, that's not a bad thing for it to feel like, except in this set with this story. If it had been made to do that, that would have been a cool way to do a Planeswalker, to emphasize her persistence and determination.
Well, now I actually really like it. But I dislike the structure of the set more. So
the card's name does not say that. It should have implied that persistence and determination and challenge, right? And then the card's art doesn't show that really.
Or futility or something. I kind of wish she'd never made it out now. You know what I mean?
I wish it had, Trevor has completely sold me on that. I wish that they had spent 8 years setting up for this.
And she doesn't make it.
Elspeth tragically doesn't make it out and gives up her life to save, I don't know, Jace or a Johnny or something. Or Daxos. I don't know, one of them. Yeah, exactly. Like anything like that, that would have, again, really hit home on the Greek tragedy element of this and sold the underworld part or whatever.
Instead of 3D printing a Heliod spear.
Yeah.
And escaping with that, yeah.
What's the other card name for Elspeth in the set? Elspeth, Undaunted Hero. That would have been my card name, something like that. That sells you immediately. She is constantly falling back into the underworld, but she's undaunted. She comes back, and she's a hero because every single thing she does protects you.
Well, other than the -1, but yeah.
Well, that makes creatures who will go out to win the game for you. So they're protecting you.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right. That's my big spicy brain take on it.
Well, I like it. Those were great thoughts on Escape.